He bought the house for next to nothing, but as soon as he stepped on the old staircase, he heard a dull ringing sound coming from under the steps. He soon realized that this house held a secret that no one was supposed to know about. Subscribe and write in the comments where you are watching from. The road that led to the outskirts of town narrowed into a strip of cracked asphalt, framed by whispering fields. The light of late afternoon sank low behind the roofs, stretching shadows long and thin across the pavement. In the back seat of the small truck, a girl watched the scenery blur by through a smudged window, her fingers tracing shapes on the glass. Her father drove in silence, his hand steady on the wheel, his thoughts far from the road. Alexei had been driving for hours, but fatigue did not touch him. What he felt instead was a tight, uncertain pulse of hope, the kind that came rarely in a life that had known too much loss. After his wife's death 2 years earlier, he had lived as though time itself had grown still. Work, food, sleep, everything followed a rhythm that dulled rather than soothed. But now, as the sign for Rose Hill Lane came into view, something in his chest stirred for the first time in months. He slowed the truck before the iron gate of a property that looked as though it had stood a century too long. Beyond the gate stretched a yard gone wild, grass high enough to hide old stones, lilac bushes twisted out of shape, a tree that had split at the base and grown crooked. The house itself rose from the weeds like a survivor. Its white paint had peeled away in long strips, and the porch sagged in defeat, but its bones still held firm. The windows caught the evening sun, flickering with faint reflections, and though the place looked abandoned, it did not seem dead. His daughter leaned forward between the seats. "Is this it, Papa?" He nodded. "Yes. Our house." The words felt strange, fragile. He had never said them before. The property had been on the market for almost 2 years. The realtor had told him the price was a miracle, less than half its value. Too far from the city, too old, too much work to be worth the effort. Yet for Alexei, who had spent his life repairing the homes of other people, that was precisely what made it right. He didn't want something finished. He wanted something to rebuild. He parked in front of the porch and stepped out. The air was thick with the smell of damp soil and pine. When he walked up the creaking steps, dust rose in a faint cloud, glowing gold in the sunlight. The door opened with a low groan, as though exhaling. Inside, the air was cool and dry, laced with the scent of age. Not rot, but something old and quiet, like forgotten linen. The floorboards moaned softly under his boots. In the main room, he saw remnants of a life that had long faded. A nail on the wall where a picture might have hung. Faint marks in the wallpaper where furniture once stood. But what caught his attention most was the staircase. It began near the center of the hallway, curving upward toward the dim light of the second floor. The banister, carved from dark wood, had lost its sheen long ago, and several of the steps dipped in the middle where countless feet had worn them down. When he placed his hand on the railing, it felt warm, almost alive, as if the wood remembered. Polina, standing beside him, frowned. "It's noisy," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "That's because it's old. Old things make noise when you touch them. But it's only a house. It just needs a little care." Still, he noticed how the sound of her voice carried strangely in the hall, not echoing, but muffled, as if the walls absorbed it. That first night, after unloading the few boxes they owned, they slept on mattresses laid directly on the floor. The wind outside pressed against the windows with a low, steady hum, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. The house creaked with every gust, as though settling into its new occupants. In the faint light from the street lamp, Alexei could see the outline of the staircase from his bedroom doorway. The shadows of the banister rails striped the wall like ribs. He listened to the small, restless noises of the night, wood shifting, the faint patter of leaves, until sleep came at last. Morning brought a different light, thin and pale through the lace curtains. Alexei woke early and walked through the rooms barefoot, the floor cool beneath his feet. Dust swirled in the beams of sunlight, and the air carried a faint sweetness, perhaps the smell of the old lilacs outside. He felt a strange contentment, something almost like peace. After breakfast, he began the work he knew best. He cleared the hallway of debris, stripped away a patch of wallpaper, measured the windows for new glass panes. His hands moved with practiced ease. Polina followed him for a while, curious, until she grew tired and went outside to play among the weeds. For several days, their life fell into a rhythm. He repaired what could be fixed, threw out what couldn't. At night, he made simple dinners, and they ate by the light of a single lamp. The silence of the house began to change. Where it had first felt heavy, it now seemed to breathe, not easily, but with effort, like a patient awakening from a long sleep. Yet the staircase remained a problem. Each step complained under the slightest weight, and the second tread from the bottom was split down the middle. Once, while Polina was running up, a piece of wood cracked so sharply that she screamed and stumbled. Alexei caught her before she fell, but the sound echoed in his head long after. He realized then that the stairs weren't merely worn, they were unsafe. That evening he sat at the kitchen table, sketching the outline of a new staircase in his notebook. He imagined something solid, built of oak or ash, smooth beneath the hand, strong enough to carry generations. The act of planning filled him with quiet satisfaction. To rebuild the stairs would be to claim the house completely, to erase the instability of the past. The next morning, he began dismantling the old structure. The first boards came loose easily, giving off a smell of old varnish and dust. Beneath the outer planks, he found layers of mismatched wood, as if repairs had been made in haste over the years. Some of the nails were bent, others rusted to dust. He worked methodically, humming under his breath. By midday, the lower steps lay in a heap beside him, and he could see the empty space beneath the frame, a dark cavity that stretched back farther than he expected. He knelt and peered inside. The air rising from it was cool, carrying a faint metallic scent. He hesitated. There was something strange about the way the boards had been arranged. One section of the inner wall had been sealed with newer planks, smoother and lighter than the rest. The nails there were driven in at awkward angles, as though by someone in haste or fear. He tapped on them with the handle of his hammer and heard a hollow sound in return. A flicker of curiosity rose in him, tinged with unease. He pried at the first plank. It resisted, but after several blows, the wood split and came free. Behind it lay a narrow pocket of darkness. He shone his flashlight inside and saw the corner of a wooden box. For a long moment he didn't move. The box was no larger than a crate, its surface covered with dust and a film of cobwebs. He reached in, his fingers brushing against the cold metal edge of a latch. It broke easily when he pulled. The lid creaked open. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, were several small bundles. When he unfolded the first, he saw the gleam of metal, a necklace of fine gold filigree, delicate as lace. Beneath it lay rings, brooches, earrings, all crafted with a precision that took his breath away. There was also a small envelope, brittle with age, and a stack of photographs tied with twine. The paper smelled faintly of smoke and perfume. He spread them out on the floorboards, one by one. In the photographs, a man stood beside a woman and a little girl. The man wore a dark suit, his expression grave but proud. The woman's eyes seemed tired, yet kind. The child's hair was tied with a ribbon, her smile uncertain. At the bottom of the box lay a silver locket. He turned it over and saw an engraving worn faint by time. For Clara, till the light returns. He whispered the words aloud, testing them on his tongue. They felt heavy, like a prayer that had waited too long to be spoken. Behind him, the house was utterly still. Even the distant hum of the wind seemed to pause. He closed the box and sat there for a long time, his hands resting on the lid. When Polina came to find him, he smiled weakly and told her he had discovered something old. She peered into the box, her eyes wide. "It's treasure," she said. He shook his head slowly. "Maybe. But not the kind you spend." That night, after Polina had gone to sleep, Alexei sat again at the kitchen table, the box before him. The lamplight made the gold shimmer faintly, casting pale reflections across the wood. He turned the locket over in his hand, feeling its weight. Somewhere in this house, long ago, someone had hidden it, perhaps with shaking hands, perhaps with a desperate hope. Outside, the wind rose, brushing the walls like a whisper. The house creaked, not with menace, but as if it were trying to speak. Alexei looked toward the staircase, its remaining steps still standing in the gloom. He imagined the hands that had built them, the feet that had climbed them, the voices that had echoed along them. In the silence, he felt something he could not name, the faint stir of connection, of continuity. He closed the box, exhaled, and whispered into the quiet, "Tomorrow, we'll finish this properly." But as he rose to turn off the lamp, the words engraved on the locket lingered in his mind, like an echo he could not escape. "Till the light returns." Outside, the first rain of the season began to fall, soft at first, then steady, drumming against the roof, as though marking the beginning of something neither he nor the house could yet understand. The house had been waiting for decades, and now, at last, someone had answered. The rain that had begun the previous night continued into morning, soft and persistent, weaving its way through the gray dawn until the world outside blurred into motionless silver. Alexei sat at the kitchen table, the same table that had become his place of thought, of sketches and late-night reflection. The wooden box rested before him, closed now, yet its presence filled the room as though it breathed. The lamplight shimmered across its tarnished surface, and he could still feel the faint chill of the metal latch in his fingertips. Polina slept upstairs, curled under the old blanket they had brought from their apartment. The sound of her quiet breathing reassured him, a fragile thread of normalcy in a morning that felt anything but ordinary. He poured himself coffee, strong and black, though it did nothing to steady the restlessness inside him. The discovery beneath the staircase haunted him with a strange duality, part wonder, part unease. He had unearthed something precious, but not his own. He opened the box once more, careful not to disturb the contents. The jewelry gleamed faintly in the soft light, each piece whispering of another life. He examined the locket again, tracing the engraved words with his thumb. For Clara, till the light returns. He spoke them aloud, and the sound of his own voice startled him. The air seemed to absorb it, thick and listening. Who was Clara? And what light had been lost? Later that day, he wrapped the box in a towel and placed it in the truck. He told Polina he needed to run errands in town and would be back by lunch. The library stood in the center of the small city, an old, red-brick building with arched windows and a bell tower that no longer rang. Inside, the scent of paper and dust settled around him like memory. The librarian, an elderly woman with soft eyes behind round glasses, looked up as he entered. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'm looking for property records," he said. "Old ones, for a house out on Rosehill Lane." She tilted her head, thoughtful. "That's one of the older areas. You'll want the archives room upstairs." She hesitated, her gaze lingering on him. "Not many people come asking about Rosehill." "You knew there?" He nodded. "Just moved in." Her smile was polite, but something flickered in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, or caution. She handed him a form to sign and pointed toward the staircase that led to the second floor. The archives room was quiet, filled with the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint ticking of a clock. He sat at one of the long tables, surrounded by shelves of ledgers and yellowed newspapers. Hours passed as he combed through property lists, census records, and deeds written in fading ink. The name appeared first in a ledger dated 1929. Emil Vlasov, goldsmith and craftsman. The address matched his own. As he turned the brittle pages, a picture began to form, incomplete, fragmented, yet vivid. Emil had owned a jewelry workshop in town, renowned for the delicacy of his designs. Advertisements in the old newspapers praised his craftsmanship. Fine silver filigree, hand-engraved gold, pieces made with heart and precision. But as the years passed, the tone of the records changed. The Great Depression struck, and the columns filled with notices of bankruptcies and closures. One entry stood out. Local artisan loses business amid collapse. Family reportedly in distress. Alexei read on. The next year, a brief report appeared in the community section. Tragedy on Rose Hill Lane. The wife of Emil Vlasov died in a fall from the home's staircase, survived by husband and young daughter. He sat back, breath caught in his throat. The staircase, the same one. The thought pressed down on him with sudden weight. He searched further, his fingers trembling as he turned the fragile pages. There were no more articles about the family after that. Only a small notice a year later. Estate sold at auction. Owner whereabouts unknown. The librarian appeared at his shoulder, her steps so soft he hadn't heard her approach. "You found something?" she asked gently. He looked up at her, the words caught in his mouth. "I think I live in their house." She leaned closer, studying the records. "Ah, the Vlasovs. I remember the name from our archives. There were rumors, of course. Strange things said after the wife's death. People talked about debts, about the bank taking everything. The husband disappeared not long after. Some said he went mad with grief. And the daughter?" Alexei asked. "Clara, I believe. She was sent to a children's home outside town." The librarian hesitated. "There's a note in one of the files that she didn't live long. Illness, I think. The times were hard. Many didn't survive those winters." Alexei closed the ledger, the paper whispering under his palms. "Thank you," he murmured, though the words felt hollow. He left soon after, the air outside sharp and cold. Driving home, he could not stop replaying the fragments in his mind. The staircase, the locket, the photograph of the smiling girl. Clara. He imagined her running down those same steps, laughter echoing through the hall, unaware of how quickly joy could vanish. He thought of Emil, a man who had built beauty with his hands only to see it crumble into ruin. By the time he reached the house, the rain had stopped, leaving the yard slick and glistening. He carried the box inside and set it gently on the table. For a long time, he stood staring at it, feeling the weight of another man's grief press against his own. That night, after Polina had fallen asleep, Alexei returned to the kitchen and opened the box again. The light from the single lamp shimmered across the jewelry like water. He picked up the locket and turned it in his fingers. A thought came to him, wild, almost absurd, to sell one of the pieces. The money would pay off a portion of the loan. It would secure their future. No one would ever know. But as he imagined it, guilt tightened in his chest. These were not his to own, much less to profit from. The locket, the inscription, the story behind them. All of it belonged to people who had already paid too high a price. He set it back in the box, ashamed of himself. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it brought uneasy dreams. He saw the staircase again, its steps warped and splintered, the shadows deep between them. In his dream, he climbed halfway before something beneath him cracked. The sound echoed, loud and final. He woke before dawn, heart pounding. The image burned into his mind. The next day, he made an appointment at the local historical bureau. The office was small, tucked between the post office and a bakery, its walls lined with framed photographs of the town through the decades. A woman greeted him, elderly, with silver hair and the calm precision of someone accustomed to preserving fragile things. He explained how he had found the box. She listened without interruption, her eyes thoughtful. When he laid the jewelry and photographs before her, she drew in a slow breath. "Yes," she said softly. "This is his work. I would know it anywhere. My grandmother used to own a brooch by Vlasov. His designs were unmistakable. The detail, the symmetry. It's rare craftsmanship." She picked up the photograph of Emil and his family, studying it closely. "The little girl," she murmured. "Clara. There's a record of her here somewhere." She left for a moment and returned with a faded binder. "Here, Clara Vlasov, taken into municipal care in 1935, died a year later of pneumonia." Her voice lowered. "Poor child." Alexei's throat tightened. He looked at the photograph again, at the girl's small, hesitant smile. "The locket was hers," he said. The woman nodded. "He made it for her after the accident. I've seen a drawing of it in one of his ledgers. It was meant to hold a lock of her mother's hair. When the banks came for the house, he must have hidden everything here, perhaps hoping she'd return one day to find it." The thought struck him deeply. A father hiding his life's work, his last hope, under the stairs, not for himself, but for his daughter. A gesture of love buried beneath stone and dust, waiting for someone to uncover it. The historian offered to document the find officially. "These items belong in preservation. They're a piece of our town's history. You'll receive recognition, of course, perhaps even a small compensation." Alexei shook his head before she finished. "I don't want money. Just make sure people remember them." She looked at him with quiet respect. "Then you've done something rare. Most people would have seen only the gold." He left the bureau carrying only the locket. The rest would stay in the museum's care. Outside, the clouds had broken, and light streamed through in soft rays. He walked slowly, the small pendant heavy in his pocket, its surface warm from his hand. He didn't know why he'd kept it. Perhaps because it was the most personal of all. Perhaps because it seemed to belong here still. As he reached his truck, he looked back toward the bureau's windows, where the jewelry now lay under careful lights, each piece catalogued and safe. He felt a sense of relief, quiet but profound, as though a burden had lifted not just from the house, but from himself. The drive home felt shorter this time. The road wound between hills, the fields shimmering with the first hints of spring. He passed the old railway tracks, the abandoned mill. Landmarks he had seen 100 times yet now seemed newly alive. When he pulled into the driveway, Polina ran out to meet him, her small boots splashing in puddles. "Did you find out about the treasure?" she asked. He smiled, kneeling to her height. "It belonged to a family who lived here long ago, a man who made beautiful things. I gave them to people who will take care of them." "Then it's not ours?" "No," he said gently. "But the house is, and that's enough." That evening, as he sat in the dim light of the kitchen, Alexei opened his notebook again. The drawing of the staircase he'd sketched days earlier still lay there, smudged at the edges. He added new lines, refining the shape, broader steps, smoother curves, a stronger base. Building it now felt like more than a renovation. It felt like an act of restoration, of healing. He would rebuild it not only for safety but as a tribute to the man who had built the first one, to the wife who had fallen, to the child who never returned. He imagined the medallion resting quietly beneath the first step, a silent bridge between their story and his own. Outside, night gathered around the house. The wind sighed through the eaves, gentle now, almost tender. Alexei listened to it for a long time before rising to check on his daughter. She slept peacefully, one hand resting over the blanket, her hair spread like ink across the pillow. In the hallway, the staircase stood half dismantled, the upper steps still shadowed. He touched the railing, feeling the worn grooves beneath his fingers. "We'll finish it soon," he whispered. "The right way this time." For a moment, he thought he felt a faint warmth through the wood, a quiet acknowledgement. He smiled at the thought, knowing it was only imagination. And yet, as he turned off the lights, the air of the house seemed lighter than before, its silence no longer hollow but full, as if the walls themselves had begun to breathe again. He went to bed with a sense of peace he had not known for years, unaware that the next chapter of his life, and of the house's, was already unfolding quietly beneath his very feet. Morning came with the pale gold of early spring. The air outside was cool, the kind that carried the scent of thawed earth and distant wood smoke. Alexei stood by the window, watching the light creep across the floorboards. The house seemed to absorb it, its old walls glowing faintly, as if awakening after a long slumber. The silence inside no longer felt heavy. It was the kind of silence that held warmth, not emptiness. He thought of the bureau, of the jewelry now resting behind glass, and of the little girl whose name had outlived her. For the first time, he felt that what had been buried beneath the stairs was not tragedy, but a gift waiting to be restored. He rolled up his sleeves and walked to the hallway. The dismantled staircase waited like an unfinished sentence, its remaining beams worn and gray. Sawdust and old nails littered the floor. For days he had postponed rebuilding, as if waiting for permission. Now, standing there with the faint hum of morning around him, he knew the time had come. He measured the angles again, recalculated the support beams, and carried in the oak planks he had purchased from a nearby mill. Each board was thick and sturdy, the wood gleaming with a faint golden sheen. He ran his hand along one of them and felt its strength. It would last decades, perhaps longer than he would. As he began to work, the sound of the hammer and saw filled the hall, rhythmic, alive. Polina came downstairs, still sleepy, rubbing her eyes. She stood barefoot on the cool floor, watching him. "Is it going to be new?" she asked. "Yes," he said without looking up, stronger than before. "Can I help?" He smiled. "You can hand me the nails, but don't touch the saw." She nodded solemnly and sat cross-legged nearby, watching her father with quiet fascination. Each strike of his hammer seemed to echo through the house, a heartbeat returning to a long, silent body. The scent of freshly cut wood mingled with the faint perfume of dust and time. As he worked, he found his mind drifting, not to the tragedy that had once haunted these steps, but to the intention behind rebuilding them. He was not erasing the past, he was giving it form again, giving it purpose. By afternoon, the lower half of the staircase was complete. The oak glowed softly in the filtered light from the windows. He wiped sweat from his brow and sat on the bottom step, studying his work. It was solid beneath him, unmoving. Polina clapped her hands in delight. "It doesn't creak anymore," she exclaimed, bouncing gently on the first step. "Not yet," he said, laughing. "Let's keep it that way." But there was still something left to do, something he had carried quietly in his pocket since his visit to the bureau. He reached into his work jacket and drew out the small locket. The silver had darkened slightly, but the engraving was still visible. For Clara. Till the light returns. He turned it over once more, feeling its weight. He stood, walked to the unfinished section beneath the stairs, and knelt. The new boards had not yet been sealed. Carefully, he lifted one plank just enough to slide the locket into the narrow, hollow space beneath. It landed with a faint, final sound, soft, almost like a sigh. He paused, his hand resting on the wood, and whispered, "You're home now." For a moment, the air in the hall shifted. A draft passed gently through the room, stirring a few specks of dust into a slow, graceful dance in the sunlight. It was only wind, he told himself. But still, he waited until it settled before continuing his work. By evening, the staircase stood whole again. The rails gleamed faintly in the lamplight, each joint smooth and firm. When he placed his foot on the first step, it held with perfect steadiness, no groan, no shudder. He climbed all the way to the top and turned, looking down. From that vantage, the hallway appeared transformed. The shadows no longer seemed to gather in corners. They softened, blending into the golden hue of the walls. It was as though the house itself exhaled. That night, dinner was simple: soup and bread, a glass of milk for Polina, and tea for him. She chattered about school, about how she wanted to paint her new room yellow. He listened, smiling absently, his thoughts returning again and again to the staircase. After she had gone to bed, he sat by the window with his notebook. The drawing of the old stairs was still there, smudged and rough. He added new lines, sketching the version now standing behind him. The strong beams, the symmetry of the railing, the precision of the angles. It was not only a technical drawing, it was something else, something closer to a portrait. Beneath the lines, he wrote quietly in pencil, "For those who built before me." He left the notebook open on the table and turned off the lamp. Sometime in the deep of night, he woke without knowing why. The moonlight spilled through the curtains, faint and pale. He thought he heard something, not a noise exactly, but the echo of one. A soft creak, like a single step on a wooden floor. He lay still, listening. Another sound followed, light and measured. Footsteps. He rose quietly, careful not to wake Polina, and stepped into the hall. The staircase stood bathed in silver light. The shadows of the railings striped the walls like bars. For a moment, everything was still. Then he saw it. A movement, not threatening, not even clear. Just the impression of a figure at the top of the stairs. A woman's shape, faint as mist, standing with her hands folded. The air shimmered around her, more light than form. Beside her, smaller, stood a child. They did not move. They only watched him. And though their faces were hidden in the dimness, he felt no fear. Instead, a strange calm filled him, as if the house had drawn a long, quiet breath. The woman raised her hand slightly, almost in greeting. Her voice, when it came, was softer than the rustle of leaves. Now the house can breathe again. Then they were gone. The light seemed to deepen for a moment, before returning to stillness. Alexei stood motionless, his heart steady. He whispered into the quiet, "Rest now." When he woke the next morning, he could not have said whether what he had seen was dream or memory. But the feeling remained, a peace so deep it seemed to reach into the bones of the house itself. Sunlight poured through the windows, warm and bright. Polina's laughter drifted from the kitchen, and the smell of toasted bread filled the air. He went downstairs, barefoot, and paused at the bottom of the staircase. The wood shone golden in the morning light. He placed his palm on the railing and felt it. Warmth, faint but real, pulsing like life beneath the surface. He climbed slowly, each step silent. At the top, he turned to look down once more. The house felt different, lighter. It no longer pressed inward with its age. Instead, it seemed to open outward, as though every corner drew breath again. When he went outside, the day was crisp and clear. The sky stretched endlessly above the rooftops, washed clean by the previous rain. Across the yard, new shoots of green grass had begun to break through the soil. The world was quietly beginning again. In the following weeks, he finished the remaining repairs, plastering the walls, repainting the kitchen, fixing the leaky gutters. He worked with patience, no longer rushing to finish. Each nail, each stroke of the brush felt like an act of gratitude. In the evenings, he would sit with Polina on the porch steps, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Sometimes she asked about the family who had lived there before, and he would tell her gently of the jeweler and his little girl, of the treasures hidden not for wealth, but for love. She listened with wide eyes, always quiet at the end, as though sensing something sacred in the story. When spring turned to early summer, a letter arrived from the Historical Bureau. They were organizing an exhibition dedicated to the artisans of the town's past, and Emil Vlasov would be among them. The jewelry Alexei had found would be displayed with a note acknowledging his discovery and his decision to preserve it. He attended the opening with Polina. The small museum smelled of polished wood and history. In a glass case, under soft light, lay the brooches and rings, the photographs, and a brief description. Recovered from the Vlasov home, 2025. Donated by current resident A. Morozov. Polina pressed her face close to the glass. "They're beautiful," she whispered. He nodded. They always were. On the far wall hung a photograph of his staircase, taken by the museum's photographer during their documentation. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Reconstructed with respect. The craftsman who rebuilt what was lost." Alexei stood before it for a long time. The image captured the glow of the wood, the symmetry of its form, and somehow, the quiet that lived within it. He felt no pride, only peace. He knew that somewhere, in the layers of time folded into the walls, the family he had come to know in fragments had found rest. When they left the museum, the sun was already setting. Polina held his hand as they walked down the steps. The air smelled faintly of lilacs, the same scent that had greeted them when they first arrived at the house months ago. That night, back home, he opened the windows wide. The breeze carried the sound of crickets and the far-off hum of the town settling into evening. He stood in the doorway, looking at the staircase one last time before turning out the lights. It stood firm and silent, glowing faintly in the dimness. As he climbed to bed, the boards did not creak. Not once. And in that silence, that deep, living silence, the house seemed to breathe. It was not the sigh of age or wear, but something new, the steady rhythm of peace, of belonging. He smiled to himself, whispering into the darkness, "Yes, it breathes." And somewhere, deep within the oak and dust and memory, the house answered in kind, softly, like a heart returning to life. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next one. Take a moment to watch the next video waiting for you right now. There are many more stories to discover. And don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. Some stories are too powerful to keep to yourself.